everyone. Welcome to the July 29th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski as we are looking ahead to Saturday's card at Saratoga. Two graded stakes featured on this Saturday program. We've got the Grade 1 Alfred G. Vanderbilt handicap, a race where I think a lot of people are going to single in the late pick 5 sequence, as well as the Grade 2 Jim Dandy. Both of them drawn pretty small fields, though. The Jim Dandy, an interesting handicapping affair that we're going to talk about in greater depth a little bit later in this podcast. Craig and I are going to go over the late pick 5 sequence. And Craig, while I think the stakes might not be the most compelling from a wagering or handicapping standpoint, the three other races in this sequence don't make it easy.
No, for sure. And it's kind of been the theme of the meet so far. A lot of small fields in the stakes, but it's good racing, so it kind of counterbalances each other. I think the other races are pretty open, big fields, plenty of chances in there. So if you do like favorites, in the stakes races, I don't think it's still a bad bet to play this. I think is some opportunity.
Yeah, and aside from all of the wagering, I think we're going to get a chance to see some pretty nice horses competing on Saturday. Obviously, like I was saying, Jackie's Warrior in the Vanderbilt, it's always a pleasure to see him run. I imagine that not too many people will be taking a shot against him in that race, but really looking forward to that Jim Dandy, Craig. We've got three nice 3-year-olds signed on, two from the Chad Brown stable, Early Voting and Zandon, as well as Epicenter, the horse that went favored in both the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness, finishing second in both of those. It's shaping up to be a really intriguing Travers, depending on what happens Saturday. But looking forward to seeing how these 3-year-olds sort them out, because I think that Travers could come up a strong race.
Oh, no doubt about it. The Travels will be strong. I'm sure we'll get some from the Haskell. We'll get some, maybe one from the Curlin, which is being run today on Friday as we record. And like you said, even though there's only 4, which are actually going to go to post in the Jim Dandy, they all are pretty darn good 3-year-olds who, with a good performance here, would have every right to run in the Travers.
Yeah, we've even got that Pletcher trainee Charge It waiting in the wings to return in the Travers off his gigantic speed figure in the Dwyer. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see who takes that step forward over the summer. We'll talk more about the Jim Dandy in a little bit, though. Let's dive into the first race in this late pick 5 sequence at Saratoga on Saturday. It is race 7, a maiden special weight event for the New York breds, going 5.5 furlongs on the turf course. And Craig, I had a hard time making a line for this race, hard time making picks. It just seems pretty wide open. A lot of the horses that seem to have the best turf form have just had a lot of chances, and they're not the most compelling to really rely on to actually break their maidens.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was thinking when I first looked through here and I saw the first 2 horses are 7-2 on the morning line. And I figured they'd look like strong contenders. And they are contenders, don't get me wrong. But it's just as you said, they've had many chances, particularly like the inside horse Built the Last. Not only has he had many chances, he's had clear leads with very a furlong to go and not been able to get the job done. So I do think there are some horses that are going to take some money to go against.
Yeah, for sure. A horse that I think you have to make a decision about in this race is one of the few lightly raced runners in this field, and that is the number 5, Mr. Chairman, a horse that was second in his only start, but it came against Maiden Claiming Company a few months ago at Belmont. Didn't think he was facing the strongest field that day, got some pace to close into. This horse is the younger half-brother to that excellent turf sprinter from a number of years ago, Disco Partner, who I think won 2 editions of the Jaipur. Just a really nice horse, the world record holder going 6 furlongs on the turf. But they didn't think too much of him to debut for a tag first time out. This is a step up in class. I wasn't sure what to do with him, Craig.
That's my sentiments exactly. I'm not sure either. I think I am going to wind up using him. Luckily, we'll get to see the board for this. If he was, a horse that gets bet down in 5-2, I don't want him in my pick 5. But if he drifts up a little from that 4-1, I do. And part of it is because though there's no flag on the pace projector, I do think there is a good amount of speed in this race. And he is definitely one who's going to be closing. Even though it was a maiden claimer he debuted in last time, I don't think the jump is quite as big when you're talking New York breds from those maiden 40s up to maiden special weight. As just said, many of the others have had lots of chances. So with Joel Rosario in a turf sprint on a closer in a race that had some pace, I'm definitely going to have to use him. Another horse who's going to be coming late would be Feathers Road, the horse just to his inside. I think he's the morning line favorite at 3-1. but he's one I can't get away from. Jose Lezcano's been riding well on the turf at Saratoga. Uh, he's had his chances, but not so many on turf. He's tried the dirt a lot, but he's one I wouldn't want to get beat if he wins. Couple others in here that I like. As I mentioned, I do think there's quite a bit of speed in here, but the main speed horse that I like is Ripe for Mischief, who took a really big jump last time at huge odds for James Bond. Just set a really fast pace, wound up getting run down, but that was at 7 furlongs. He turns back to five, and it just seemed like he figures things out in that third start. So I like his outside draw, and he's one of the price horses I'll be using.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up because I want to talk about him a little bit more in depth. I do agree that Feathers Road is kind of the horse to beat in this race. He just consistently shows up with efforts that put him in the mix here. He's supposed to get the right kind of pace set up. He's just a horse that's hard to trust to actually win. Of all of these runners that have had a lot of chances, I feel like he's the one that's been in the most spots where he was supposed to have already broken his maiden. He's had 10 tries, been at second or third 7 out of those 10 times, only on the turf in 5 of those races, but I mean, he's gotten the right setups a few times before and just hasn't quite been able to seal the deal. You brought up some of the speed horses, Craig. I think the 5.5 furlong distance is an interesting discussion point for some of these horses that want to show speed, because you've got horses down on the inside like Built to Last and Hey Mackett's Jack, who have kind of been hitting a wall in the last furlong, going to 6 and 7 furlongs at Belmont Park. Sometimes the turn back to 5.5 can really benefit these horses, but then you've got the double-edged sword of the fact that a lot of runners are looking for that turn back to show a little more speed. So the paces can sometimes really heat up in these 5.5 furlong sprint races. Sometimes inside speed, not really where you want to be. Outside post positions can be preferred. So I was kind of along the same lines as you, looking at that number 9, Ripe for Mischief. And this is one of those situations where I think you can't look at this horse's positioning on the pace projector too much, because he didn't show any speed whatsoever in the first couple starts of his career. And the pace projector, based on the early pace ratings, kind of averages the horse's running lines and the pace figures in the first 3 starts. So it's not going to just show him on the front end based on him showing speed in 1 out of his 3 races, but he was second off the layoff last time and was aggressively ridden to inside some other speeds by Heeman Harkey that day to get the front end. He was really hustled into a pretty fast pace, and he was the one that was running on best of all at the end of all those speed horses, just kind of not able to get that 7 furlong distance. Feels like one that the 5.5 is really going to benefit him, and he's getting a huge rider upgrade to Luis Saez. So he's a horse that I think I definitely want to use. Not sure what price he's going to be. I pegged him at 12 to 1. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets bet down a little bit off that, but there are so many ways to go in this race. I can't imagine that anybody is too short on the board.
No, I would agree. And we haven't talked much about Hey Mackett's Jack. He's one that I really don't know what to do with, because he's run on the lead. He's run a little bit off the pace at times. He's switched back and forth from dirt, but I do think with Irad Ortiz, he's not going to be up front. He's probably going to tuck in behind the speeds, and I don't want to totally rule him out in here. Now, when you bet Irad at Saratoga, you're always going to take the short of it at the tote board. But I do think he's a horse who's eligible to find his way to the winner's circle.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to go in this race. I did put Ripe for Mischief on top in my picks. I do have Built to Last and Hey Mackett's Jack in there. Wouldn't be shocked by Feathers Road. I kind of took the negative view on that second time starter, Mr. Chairman. I didn't like that maiden race as much as maybe some bettors might. We'll see. He does have Joel Rosario aboard with Christophe Clement as the trainer, so it feels like those always take some money, but I was a little bit negative on that one. Let's move on to the next race in this late pick 5 sequence. It is race 8, the grade 1 Alfred G. Vanderbilt handicap, going 6 furlongs on the main track. And Craig, I pegged him at 1 to 5 on the morning line. I think he probably is going to be right around that price. It's just awfully hard to look past Jackie's Warrior in this field. I know it's a handicap and he's giving away some weight to a few others in here, but it's hard to imagine that getting him beat.
Yeah, I tried. I wanted to make a case to beat him, and I just couldn't come up with him. So he's going to be a single for me. And my thoughts as I were going for the field would be this would be a really fun race to bet if he weren't in it. Because outside of him, I think there's some really interesting horses, and I'll probably play it vertically. But as far as a pick 5, I just couldn't get there. Maybe had he drawn inside with a horse who's really fast, like knee deep in snow down, who's drawn on the rail, had been outside of him, things could have got interesting. But if that one gets a bit ambitious and tries to go, he can just sit outside of him. So I just don't see any way he's not winning this race if he shows up at all.
Yeah, it's not like Jackie's Warrior is a horse that's ever been particularly vulnerable to a pace scenario. He is not the kind of speed horse that needs to be all alone up front. He's happy to be alongside another horse in a duel early. He actually seems to like the competition, but when they come around that turn, he just runs those bends so much better than other horses, and that's when typically when he builds his advantage. And it's a grade one event. He's really the only grade one caliber horse in this field. He's just earned speed figures that are up there in the stratosphere, basically in every race except that Breeders' Cup Sprint, where he did have a significant excuse coming out of that race with, I think, a knee chip. So he's just been in great form since returning as a 4-year-old this season, and it's pretty hard to view a 6 to 10 pound weight shift getting him beat in this race. I do believe that weight matters, but against this field and looking at the horses that are getting weight, I think they need a little bit more help than that. Craig, you were talking about, maybe getting some prices in there underneath or thinking this is an interesting betting race behind Jackie's Warrior. If there was another horse that you were looking at, even just to complete an exacta, who would it be?
For me, it would probably be Willie Boy, the two horse. He's one who's shown some versatility. He's one on the lead, but he doesn't have to be on the lead, as we saw last time in that Smile Sprint. Seems to be moving in the right direction. Where some others I'm not so sure about. The two outside horses seem overmatched. Knee deep in snow. I like this horse. He's moving in the right direction, but he's going to have to deal with Jackie's Warrior. And the same for New York Traffic, who's a horse who's done most of his good running up close to the pace. So I would prefer Willie Boy of the others and may play a straight exact in here.
Yeah, I feel like New York Traffic could be the second choice in this race, and I'm just not a big fan of this horse. I think his recent sprint race improvement is mostly due to some weaker competition in those races. He's just a horse that when they step him up against the toughies, those grade one, grade two stakes races, he seems to underperform a little bit. So I don't really trust him to show up in this spot. I agree. Willie Boy just seems like the now horse. He's one that can pass others if this race does come apart a little bit, which seems like a possibility when you're going to have runners like Knee Deep in Snow and Doc Amster trying to make the lead ahead of Jackie's Warrior. That could be a futile chase in the early going. So maybe things fall apart behind the favorite, and a horse like Willie Boy can pick up the pieces. I also think you could make that same case for long range Toddy. He's not exactly a closing type, but in this race, I wouldn't be surprised if he's trying to come from a little bit off of it. And he's not a winning type long range Toddy, Craig. I think it's been 21 straight races that he's lost, but he is the kind of horse that could pick up the pieces in a race like this.
Yeah, I agree. If I was going to play trifectas, it would be with him and Willie Boy. He's going to be probably the second longest choice in the field. So those would be the two for me. And I may even use him in an exacta underneath because it's not like he's been totally overmatched, and particularly if there was some moisture in the track, which he seems to enjoy. I haven't checked the forecast yet, but you never know at Saratoga. We can get rain at a moment's notice there.
Yeah, it's supposed to be dry this weekend after some rain on Thursday, but you never know. As you said, it can always change by the minute in Saratoga. Let's move on to the next graded stakes in this sequence, race 9. It is the grade 2 Jim Dandy, a field of 5 signed on. I saw our colleague Dave Gretting report that this will scratch down to a field of 4 because the number 1 Western River, who was cross-entered in the Curlin on Friday, will run in that spot instead. So he's not going to play, just 4 runners in this Jim Dandy, Craig. But unlike the race we just talked about, I think this is going to be a place where it's hard for many to single a horse because it is pretty competitive, especially among those 3 favorites, Epicenter and the 2 from the Chad Brown barn, Early Voting and Zandon. They all have pretty similar credentials coming in.
They do, and for me, for me personally, I'm going to try to separate them because I don't want to use too many horses in this leg. None of them are going to be much of a price, so I think this race is one where you can separate and kind of save some money on your ticket. And so I looked at the field. Obviously, early voting has a pace advantage in here when you look at the Timeform US pace projector. He's shown on an early lead. He has a nice gap back to the horse in second, Epicenter. He would seem to be the easy one to like, but I'm actually going to go with Epicenter as my top horse in here. I will use early voting more as a B type in here, but I just think the small field size is really going to help Epicenter. I think he's going to be ridden pretty aggressively after what we saw in the Preakness and the unhappiness of the trainer after that with him getting shuffled back so far early on. And I just think he's a horse who's probably deserves the grade one win that he hasn't quite been able to get yet. He was obviously second in the Derby and the Preakness with tougher trips, but as you pegged him the favorite on the morning line, I think he's the horse to beat in here for sure. As for Zandon, I'm not as high on him as I am the other two. I won't use him at all. The only thing going in his favor, I think, is how deep the track's been at Saratoga, and if things get testy up front between those two, maybe it could set up for him. But I just think he's about a half a level below those two. He hasn't run the same speed figures that they have, and if he couldn't beat Epicenter in the Kentucky Derby, I have a hard time seeing him be able to beat him here.
Yeah, I mean, there are things to like about all three of these favorites, and kind of along the same lines as you, I was initially looking at this like it's maybe early voting's race to lose because of this pace advantage that he is supposed to enjoy, that the pace projector is suggesting he will. I just kind of want to see him do it again, Craig. He got a very good trip in the Wood Memorial when he was run down by Mo Donegal. Obviously, that race has been flattered subsequently with both of these horses coming back to win classics during this Triple Crown season. But the Preakness, it got us a very high speed figure. I think it's showing up as a 129, and the weight adjusted figures I'm looking at in the TimeformUS PP is, of all the Triple Crown races, that Preakness fig is one that I kind of want to see validated with horses coming out of it. We've had a few run back that have been a little bit disappointing. Some of them you can make excuses. I know Creative Minister came back to run poorly in the Belmont Stakes. Maybe he's not a mile and a half horse. But I kind of want to see early voting do it again. And Epicenter, while I wasn't of the opinion that he got as poor a trip as some were suggesting coming out of the Preakness, I didn't think it was clear cut that he was definitely the best horse. It wasn't the running style that he's shown that he's best using in the past. And I think they're going to get a little more aggressive with Epicenter this time. And I would imagine that, unlike in the Preakness, he's going to be lapped right on top of early voting in the early going. I don't think early voting is going to open up some big lead on this field. I would imagine Epicenter is going to be 3/4 of a length off him early, and Epicenter has shown that he's got that turn of foot and he can really turn it on coming to the quarter pole. So I like him a little bit more than early voting, but as I was going through this race, I ended up going with Zandon as my top pick. I do think he's going to be slightly the best price of the three, and we talked about this, Craig, in the aftermath of the Kentucky Derby. I didn't see Zandon's Derby trip as being that different than Epicenter's. I thought that they both were in a similar position early. I think Zandon was a length to 2 lengths behind Epicenter at almost every call of the race, basically just following him the entire way. It's not like if Zandon was a closer that took advantage of the hot pace at Epicenter wasn't. I mean, they had very similar pace figure lines in the Kentucky Derby, and I've always been a little bit skeptical of Zandon wanting to go the 1.25 miles. I feel like that was just pushing him to the limit a little bit, especially given the aggressive ride that he got in the Derby. He just kind of lacked the stamina to see out that final eighth of a mile. I think the turn back to 1.125 miles is really going to benefit Zandon. And furthermore, Zandon is a horse that sometimes isn't the quickest out of the gate. He can languish towards the back of the pack early. And in a large field with a lot of traffic, it can be tough to negotiate a trip. In this small field of four runners, I don't think Zandon's going to be that far off the pace, maybe 3 or 4 lengths behind early voting, and he's got a killer turn of foot. We saw him use it in the Bluegrass to great effect, and I think if he's in range of the leaders at the top of the stretch, he's going to be awfully tough to hold off in this race. I'm not getting too caught up in this pace scenario because I think over this demanding Saratoga track, it really is going to come down to the finish. And I'm going to give the slight edge to Zandon this time. You know, Craig, he's a horse that I've liked all along. I kind of want to see him take that step forward over the summer of his 3-year-old season. I think he might just be a good fit for this Jim Dandy.
Yeah, I can see that, and I totally agree with you about the field size. I just really think Epicenter is going to be ready to fire on all cylinders and run his best race, so I'd lean that way. But I can't argue with anybody for going with Zandon because, as you said, he is going to be the longest of the three, I would think, in here.
I don't want to give short shrift to Tawny Port. It's not like he's a slouch, Craig. He actually ran pretty well in the Ohio Derby last time. It's just, even though this is a prep for the Travers, it came up so tough that it's hard to see him beating the three favorites.
Yeah, I mean, he ran a nice speed figure. He did get a really nice setup in that Ohio Derby. I know I mentioned that race was looking pretty strong last time. Now, when we talked about the Haskell, White Abario didn't run that day, but he did no running whatsoever. So I'm not going to hold that against the race. It's still been a pretty strong race on the run ups. It just seems like he's in a little bit tougher here. Um, Hard for me to see him out kicking Zandon, and they're both probably going to be in a similar position.
Let's move back over to the turf courses to close out this pick five sequence in the last couple of legs. Race 10 is a non-winners of one other than allowance event going a mile and a 16th on the Melon course for the 3-year-old and up males. And Greg, we've got an exciting horse in this race in the number 12 Capensis, one that turned a lot of heads when he made his career debut at Belmont about a month ago. This horse was a $2 million purchase as a youngster. Took a little while to get to the races, but finally unveiled him on the turf last month at Belmont, and boy, he couldn't have been much more impressive. He just absolutely motored through the stretch once he finally hit top gear and drew away from what looked like a pretty good field at the time, earning the kind of speed figure that says stakes should be on the horizon for him eventually, but first he's got to clear this N1X hurdle.
Yeah, and then the horse racing is never easy. Box, of course, he would draw the 12 post one that it has to be considered a negative on this course. I'm not saying he can't overcome it. The talent he showed first time out just shows that he can. He ran a 113 speed figure. Couple horses have run back with mixed results. Some have run okay, some not okay. But I don't think there's any doubt what we saw from him was a really good horse that day. So I think he's a must use in here. I don't want to go to where he's a single though, just because of that post. Curious what you think about that, but it's tough to win from out there at Saratoga.
Yeah, it's definitely not an ideal post position by any stretch. It's a full field here. We've got, not a ton of pace signed on. I've got to be honest. I mean, the number 2 C Falls looks like he could go forward. The same thing for that stretch out sprinter, the number 4 Capone. But beyond those two, I don't see a ton of horses that want to be forward in this race. So if the field really bunches up, there might not be that opportunity to tuck over towards the rail. You don't want to see a horse like this go 3 to 4 wide around both turns. I think that's a little tougher to do at Saratoga than it is at Belmont Park. He might have the talent to overcome even a poor or even a wide trip, Craig, because he just looked that good on debut. We had talked about this race on the Pacecast in the aftermath. I mean, I think track has had him coming home his final 5/16 in 27.88 seconds, which is just a crazy figure. I know the turf course was pretty hard towards the end of the meet at Belmont Park, but this horse was absolutely flying through the stretch that day. So he does appear to have some real talent. He's trained well out of that. His recent turf works have been in company with that top Todd Pletcher turf 3-year-old Annapolis, and Capensis has been holding his own in company with that horse in the morning. So you'd imagine that stakes are on the horizon maybe next time out for this horse if he clears this hurdle, but tough to take too short a price on him when he does have to overcome that wide draw.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to use him. I'm not going to get knocked out of this thing if he wins and just throw my money away because I do think he's the most likely winner. So I'm going to use him in here, but I'm not going to single him or anything. And I think the horse you have to start with as one who could beat him is to the inside with orchestration. Obviously, it's Chad Brown and Irad Ortiz, but sometimes they get overlooked. And I think a horse like this could get overlooked a little bit with a horse like Capensis in the field, and he's a horse who showed some talent. He won second time out at Saratoga last year. Then he showed up at Keeneland in a really nice allowance race there. He had a terrible trip that day. Really had no chance. He's been off over a year, but he comes back, and Chad Brown has him ready to run. So he's one I will probably use in equal parts or maybe even a little stronger than Capensis.
Yeah, I was kind of on the fence about orchestration. Like you were saying, he's probably going to be the second choice, mostly because of the connections. I mean, he does have pretty good form coming in here. He's returning from a layoff. I do prefer this horse going longer than a mile and a 16th. He broke his maiden going a mile and 3/16 to Saratoga last summer. Got plenty of pace to close into that day. Watching his races, he's not a horse that possesses much turn of foot. He's kind of one of those grinder, one-paced runners that takes a long time to wind up. The jockeys really need to get after him to get him to hit top gear. And that was kind of the problem in that Keeneland race last time. Jose Ortiz was trying to get him to go. He finally got rolling, but he was kind of in between horses in an awkward spot, couldn't quite make it to the gap in time, and he got sandwiched between horses, cut off, had to alter course to come around, and was finishing decently at the end. But once again, it kind of took him a little while to regroup after having to, get out of that difficult spot in traffic. So he's just not the most agile runner, and I worry about the distance for him, a mile and a 16th. I feel like it could be a little short. So he was not the one that I wanted to focus on as my alternative to the favorite. I'm going back to a horse, Craig, that I think I've been chasing for a little while now, but I do think that I have reason to go back to the well because he's had some trips, and that's the number 5, Shoddy, who I'm a big fan of this horse. I mean, he's only 1 for 13 in his life, but I think he's run deceptively well on a number of occasions. A lot of those losses against winners, I think he's run better than the results would indicate, particularly in his last couple of starts. He's just made 2 starts on turf so far since returning for his 4-year-old season, and he's had excuses both times. Just got a silly ride 2 back when Eric Cancel was kind of ripping him off the pace for no reason to the back of the pack behind a pace that wasn't that fast and actually closed well to just miss second that day. And then last time out, Craig, I think we had talked about this race maybe a little bit beforehand. I think we did it on the forecast that, this was a horse that didn't necessarily project to be as far back as he was, but he clipped heels at the start. Just a disastrous beginning for him, was out the back of the pack early, actually did well to nearly get into the superfecta at the wire, but just that was not a race flow that suited him at all. I love this rider upgrade to Javier Castellano, who I think has been riding deceptively well so far at this Saratoga meet, and I'm hoping that he can get him into a position in mid-pack and save some ground towards the inside now that he's drawn in a post that's closer to the rail than Capensis. So I just have to take him again because he's going to be a price in this race with a big favorite in here like Capensis. If he's 10, 12 to 1, that's good enough for me to take one more shot.
Yeah, there were 2 prices I was going to use in here, and he's one of them for all the reasons you mentioned. Mostly the rider upgrade, which, as you said, Javier Castellano has been riding great this meet. I don't even know if it's deceptive. People have been noticing, and he's just riding well. He seems like the 5 years ago Javier Castellano, the way he's riding. So definitely a huge upgrade. And the other horse I want to take a look at a big price is Irwin. He's 10 to 1 on the morning line. I suspect he will even drift up from that. And I've actually liked his 2 races in this country since coming over from Ireland. He's run decent speed figures. He's improved each time out, and he's just a horse I think might get totally overlooked in here. I will definitely be playing this race in verticals, and in those I'll be using both the 5 Shoddy and the 9 Irwin.
One more horse that we should mention before we move on, who's kind of a weird horse in this race, is the number 10, Coliseo, who is making his U.S. debut for trainer Wayne Catalano. This horse was second in the French 2000 Guineas back in May of 2021 to St. Mark's Basilica, who I believe was the horse of the year in Europe last year. He was the top Aidan O'Brien 3-year-old, won a string of Group 1 races over that summer. He was 80 to 1 when he was second to that horse. Kind of hasn't recaptured that form ever since. Maybe he's going to respond well to U.S. racing. This is not a private purchase or anything. He's racing for the same ownership that he was racing for overseas. I think they tried to sell him last year, and he was an RNA at a French sale for upwards of 600,000 US dollars. So he's just a weird horse in here. I don't know what to make of him, Craig, but I'm not going to be surprised when he runs well because there's talent in there somewhere.
There is. It just seems like he hasn't been in the greatest form. He hasn't been running in that last stakes race he won in France. Hasn't been much, and I just worry about the horses who campaign exclusively in France, like he has been. The courses are just so much different than what he's going to face over here. Like you said, maybe he'll actually like it and run okay, but this isn't Wayne Catalano's specialty, training foreign shippers. So I was going to avoid him.
Let's move on to the finale, which is also the last leg of this late pick 5 sequence at Saratoga. Race 11, 1 mile on the inner turf course. This is a $25,000 claimer for the older horses. And Craig, we've got a few class droppers in this race, some that have proven themselves at this $25,000 level. I imagine the horse that's going to take the most money is the number 9 Healing, who is one of those runners that is dropping for trainer Mike Maker. He reeled off 3 victories in a row earlier this year, coming off a brief layoff after trying tougher last time at Pimlico. Just seems like one that might be placed to win at Saratoga.
Yeah, there's a few of them in here, as you say. I have no problem with Healing other than his price, and I'm going to be playing some other short prices in here, so I'm not going to use him very much, if at all. The horse I'm going to lean on pretty heavily in here is a similar class dropper, but in a different form, coming off a win, and that's the 5 horse Barley one. I just really liked what I saw last race off the trainer change from Keith O'Brien to Jose Camejo, who's been having an actual training really well in New York, winning lots of races. Actually has the hot notation in TimeformUS, and he kind of flies under the radar, but he's doing everything right. He's also ridden by Javier Castellano, just like the horse we talked about in the last race, and I just think he's the one at a price that I want in here.
Yeah, I was not thrilled with him. I didn't love the quality of the field that he was beating in that allowance race against New York Breds last time. So we'll see. I mean, I think that this is realistic to run him for 25,000 rather than stepping up to a tougher optional claiming race. Yeah, I respect the job this barn does. I just wasn't thrilled with this horse. I'm not way against Healing. I think he's the one to beat in this spot. But there are 2 other alternatives that interest me a little bit. The logical one would be the number 1, The Last Zip, who I thought ran really well going 7 furlongs last time. There was not much pace at all in that race. It was wired on the front end by Not Far Now. The Last Zip, turning back in distance, just lacked a little bit of early speed, but he really was hitting his best stride at the end, pulled well clear of the rest of the field while coming after that winner. I think the mile is not going to be a problem for him. He's been very effective going that distance in the past, and he even owns a victory over the Saratoga turf course. So I think The Last Zip makes plenty of sense in this race. And kind of my bomb that I want to get in somewhere in the last leg of this sequence would be the number 8, Mad Monies. There's not much speed in this field at all. I mean, maybe Mo Reddy goes forward under Irad Ortiz with the blinkers going back on, but it's not like he's ever been the quickest horse in the early going. And Mad Monies, I know that just looking through his recent performances, it doesn't appear that he has much turf form, but there was a time when he was running just as well on the turf as he was on the dirt. They just focused more on dirt racing over the past few seasons with him. There are obviously some question marks with this horse making his second start off a year-long layoff. Didn't do much running in the return race, a $20,000 claimer, voided claim out of that race, which some people might perceive as a negative. I don't know if I would put too much stock in that one way or the other, because we see a lot of voided claims that appear to mean nothing on these horses. But Mad Money's, I mean, he has plenty of back class. There was a time when he was a pretty good horse, and his last turf race back in May of 21 at Belmont is a lot better than it looks, because that was an extremely fast pace that he was right on top of that totally fell apart. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that race as evidence that he can't run on the turf anymore. And I just think he's going to go forward in here. It's kind of an oddly ambitious spot for him to try off that poor return effort at Belmont last time. Gustavo Rodriguez, a trainer that can be a little sneaky at times, and I just think he's one that's going to get a little bit ignored on the tote board. That is interesting as a candidate to wire this field when that running style can be dangerous in these 1 mile races on the inner.
Yeah, I tried to make a case for him. I just couldn't get past the distance. He's been good on the turf in the past, but they were all sprinting. His mile efforts haven't been good, but I would never try to talk anybody off a price, particularly one that will most likely be in the lead. So I can see your point there. The only other horse I was going to mention that I would use was that 1 horse, The Last Zip, because for the reasons you mentioned, I liked this last race. He gets more distance this time. He was closing well into a slow pace, so he was the other one for me.
Well, I think we covered most of the contenders in this sequence. Before we wrap it up, let's just do a little bit of a recap, Craig, and talk about where we would emphasize which races we're going to try to narrow down a little bit. I think we're both going to single Jackie's Warrior in this sequence, so we don't really have to spend a lot of time on that race. But among the others, especially those non-stakes events, which horses would you be leaning on a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think outside of the stakes races, you need some prices. So I'm going to lean on Ripe for Mischief in that first leg. I'll use some others. Hey, Mackets Jack, Mr. Chairman, but he's the one I'm going to try to get a price home. The stakes races, I'm going to lean on Epicenter pretty heavily. Maybe use early voting as a backup. We already talked about Jackie's Warrior. Um, in that 10th race, the turf race, I'll probably use them all in equal strength. The more I think about it, it would be Capensis, Orchestration, and Irwin. I think Capensis is the most likely winner, but I just worry about that post position. It's going to be tough from out there. As you said, not a lot of pace. So I do want to spread a little bit in that one. And then the last leg, I'll use three, but the horse I'm really going to lean on is the five Barley one. The other two would be the last zip and heel.
Yeah, and we have a similar ticket construction, just different horses in a few of these races. Yeah, we both like Ripe for Mischief if he's a price in this first leg. I would use some of the other turnback speeds like Built to Last and Hey It's Jack. I think they're both dangerous. I want those horses that showed speed at those longer turf sprints at Belmont Park. Yeah, we covered most of the stakes. I'd be leaning on Zandon in the Jim Dandy. I could probably be talked into using Epicenter as a backup. Early voting might be one that I try to beat in here, just trying to narrow that down as much as possible. I don't want too much play going through that race. I would try to narrow down the 10th race as well, to just Shoddy, and Capensis. Capensis is way the horse to beat. I just have that opinion on the long shot that I'm going to try one more time with. And, I'm not way against Orchestration. I just kind of question if I think he's going to be a fair value in this race. And the others just didn't really interest me that much in the 10th. And then I would close things out by not really being against Healing, but he'd probably be a horse that I would downgrade to a B in an ABC type wager because even though he's going to be a short price, I think he can win here. It's not like I don't like him. I think he's arguably the most likely winner of this race. It's just I don't think that he's offering a ton of positive value. I would upgrade the last zip and that long shot that I like, Mad Money's probably to A status over him, just trying to get some bigger prices home in that last leg because I think both of those horses could be decent value in the final leg of the sequence. Well, Craig, that's all the handicapping for the podcast this week. I'm sure we'll recap these races on the Pacecast next week, particularly those two stakes event. I'm very much looking forward to seeing how the Jim Dandy plays out, and it's just always a pleasure to get to see Jackie's Warrior run.
Oh, for sure. I'm looking forward to these stakes. I haven't even looked ahead to the Sunday card. I'm sure they have some decent racing, and Delmar has some nice racing. So there'll be plenty to talk about on the Pacecast this week.
Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for listening, and make sure to tune in to that TimeformUS Forecast coming up next Tuesday.